Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Divulgence. I'm Jordan Vezeau, and I want to wish everyone a happy Remembrance Day for those of you who are Canadian, as well as any of those who may celebrate it. I'm very, very excited today to have our next guest in. We had him in to talk about Camp X, and I think it was our best episode so far. I got nothing but wonderful reviews and responses from it. So I'm super happy to welcome back author Lynn-Philip Hodgson. Hey, Lynn, how are you today?
Very well, thank you.
And I just want to add again that Lynn is an author of a very, very long line of interesting books. I've read a few so far. A lot of them encompass Canadian history within World War and a lot of different spy stuff, such as Camp X. So I would recommend starting with Inside Camp X. I found that at a bookstore. I picked it up, couldn't stop reading it, and I mean, here we are. So if you want to start learning more about that, I would start with that book. But I'm sure at the end of the show, Lynn will tell us any websites or whatnot, and anywhere that you can get other books of his. So today I wanted to bring you in because I thought we'd do a special Canadian Remembrance Day episode, and I asked you what kind of stuff you think you want to talk about, and you laid out a few interesting things for me. So where would you like to start today?
I thought I would start with talking about the training that went on at Camp X and also in schools in England as well. Simultaneously, agents were being trained in Canada and in Great Britain, and then deployed, of course, behind enemy lines. So I thought I would talk about the specific training that went on at Camp X. They had a building there called the lecture hall. And a very important part of the training, I'm sure that the other part was more exciting for the agents, the type of thing where they were learning how to use explosives properly, small arms, weapons that they would be learning how to use correctly, and other things, all kinds of gadgets and whatnot. I'm sure they would find that a little more exciting than the blackboard theory of a classroom. But it was a very important part of that training because, and I'll give you the example of Andy Dervitz. Andy was a very good friend of ours for many years, and until the day he passed away. And so Andy was able to tell me firsthand information about what he experienced at Camp X. And for me, it was really eye-opening. And the reason for that is that he would be taken into a room in the lecture hall that was made to look like a typical Gestapo prison, where you're sitting in the middle of the room with the light in your eyes and nobody else in the room. And you would have to sit there for an hour before somebody would finally come in and go through their interrogation. To make it as realistic as possible, what they would do is the commandant of Camp X, his name was Skilbeck, was fluent in German. And so they had it also in the lecture hall, all the uniforms of the Axis countries. And so they would have him dress up in the German officer's uniform. And he would come in and in German and with English, of course, as well, interrogate the agents in training. And they made it as realistic as possible. And Andy said to me that they beat him within an inch of his life, and the type of beatings that he would receive would be very similar to experience behind enemy lines. And that's because, of course, agents who had been in these various prisons, Avenue Folk, for example, in Paris, and managed to escape and made it back to England, they would be debriefed, of course, and asked about everything that went on, and very specific interrogation at the hands of the Germans. So he wasn't very happy about it at the time, of course. But then when he actually went on his mission and was captured by the Gestapo and taken to one of these prisons and interrogated. He said that because of his time at Camp X and the training that he received there in psychological warfare, they didn't throw anything at him that he wasn't already expecting. So it made it very easy for him to know what was coming up, brace yourself for it, get ready for it, and go from there. So that was one aspect of it. And as I said, it was as realistic as possible.
And that was one of the, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
That was one of the huge pieces as to why Camp X was so effective and produced such effective agents, because just like you said, they had mock interrogation rooms. Just like we've talked about before, they used live blank. Were they blanks though? I think they were blank. It was blank ammunition.
Well, the ammunition that they used in the field at the camp was live ammunition. That was to make it as realistic as possible as well. Yeah.
And you mentioned the lecture hall, and we spoke before about the Bowmanville POW camp, and they essentially used that as a means to stock up their lecture hall, and their, putting together these different uniforms and figuring out, their tactics and their environments. And it's just amazing that, the effort that they put into making this so real, and the effect that it had on this agent that you're talking about. It makes such a difference when it comes to the individual, and it just makes a huge difference when it comes to saving critical information and top secret stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the other thing they would do is they would have a dentist come in to the camp, and he would drill a cavity into their back tooth, and they would put a lead cyanide capsule into the tooth. Yeah. And they would fit it so that it was just above the tooth line, and then take it out. And then they would sew it into the seam of their uniform. And of course, they would tell them that once you're captured, once you're taken to this prison, here's what's going to happen to you. There's going to be hours and hours of silence. You may be stripped naked and left in your cell for hours on the cold floor. All these psychological tortures that they would put you through first before they even started to do the interrogation. And I think I mentioned to you last time that what they did was they said that if you get to the point where you can't stand the pain anymore of the torture, well, then the next time you are taken out, just before being taken out, take the lead piece out of your tooth and out of your seam, put it in your tooth, and then just bite down on it. You're dead in seconds. But before you got to that point, they would say to them, tell them as little information as you can at first, but give them a little bit, a tidbit. And so that the next time they would take you, they put you back in your cell, and the next time they would take a break then and decide on what kind of questioning they were going to have, knowing that little bit of tidbit as a follow-up. And then they would haul you out again and bring you back into the room and go through the process again. And so the British handlers would say to them, you must do this for at least 24 hours. And that 24 hours will give the safe house that you were part of time to break down and disperse.
Okay.
So as soon as they got wind that you've disappeared, the other thing, of course, is they would say, if you were going out on an assignment and you said, I'll be back by 4 o'clock this afternoon, if you weren't back by 4 o'clock, they would break up, destroy everything, break up the cell, and they would head to different safe houses throughout Paris, for example. And then, of course, the Germans, if they were able to get the information out of an agent, would, of course, raid the safe house and find no one there. And they would have to start over again. So after the 24 hours, they would say to them, go ahead and feed some more information to them. And eventually they would have to admit that, yes, I'm an Allied secret agent. Yes, I was trained in Canada at a secret location. That's all I know about it. And they would just feed them as little information and vague information as possible as they would go along. And that was the whole process that they all went through. And it was because of that they were often so successful. But the Germans were very good at it. They were very good at their interrogation and getting information out of these agents. And then the other thing, go ahead.
Sorry, did I can't even remember this, but did the agents, like kind of the agents being trained at Camp X, did they know the location of Camp X? Were they brought in blindfolded or by other means where they didn't know the location?
Yeah,
they did area?
Okay. Yeah, they did not know the location. They were brought in by truck under cover of darkness, and a number of them at a time, say 9 to 12 of them at a time, and shown to their quarters and then told to meet the next morning in the lecture hall, where they would be advised of the process of training, the duration of the training. But other than that, they really didn't know where they were. They just knew that they were within a driving distance of where they were picked up in Toronto. They were stationed at number 2 military district for the purpose of transportation. The other thing that the Germans did is they had something called Funkspiel. And Funkspiel in German means playback. And when they one of the deadliest jobs of a secret agent was that of the radio operator. The guy in charge, let's say it's a Jedburgh, which is a team of agents going in on a mission. The guy in charge, who was usually a captain or a major, would be in charge of the entire mission. He obviously had the most dangerous job, because once the Germans figured out that he was the guy that was in charge, he's going to go through the most horrendous torture possible. And then the second worst job was that of the radio operator, because they wanted to try to force you to use your radio to contact England, to tell them that you're safe, and tell them to send supplies and send others. And the supplies that they would send, of course, were canisters that would be dropped. They were sealed canisters, very large canisters, and they would be filled with all kinds of weapons: Tommy guns, Sten guns, Bren guns, small arms, grenades, RDX explosives, etc. And that would be to go to a predetermined location in field, for example, where they were originally dropped. So the Germans would attempt to get you to send that message back. But then if you said, no, I refuse, I won't do it, of course, they're going to put you through the torture again to try to get you to do it. But if you held out and you didn't do it, they would say, okay, then would you at least show us how you would operate a key, a Morse code key? And they called this taping their fist. And that process was that in another room, there would be a German who was very inept at, or very, say, qualified in the area of listening to Morse code and repeating Morse code. So each guy has a unique signature. It's almost like a fingerprint. When he's tapping out in Morse code, and they would use their fist like this. That's why they called it that. And so he would tap it out, and each one of them had a unique tapping of the Morse key. So he would practice, the German would practice this over and over and over again. Then he would actually then send a message to England, identifying himself as this agent, and hope that the British would fall for it. So that's what Funkspiel was all about, the playback. And they were very good at it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. You had to have a qualifier on the front of the message. And the qualifier was that it could be your mother's middle name, or your father's middle name, or your grandfather's middle name, for example. So they would check for this qualifier. And if the qualifier were not there, then they would have to make a decision. The decision was going to be, do we go ahead and accept the message Did he actually forget to add it? Okay, and is it a good message?
Right.
So then they would then send a message back and they would ask him a question. And before you went on your mission, you would have given an interview about yourself and your upbringing and whatnot. And they might say, can you tell us what you and John did when you were 10 years old? You know, what significant thing happened? And of course, the Germans would be stymied and they would have to go back to the agent, try and get the information again out of the agent as to what that answer was to that. Of course, if they took too long, then the British wouldn't believe it and they would shut down the operation. They just wouldn't accept any more messages from that agent and put him down as missing in action. So he was out of the loop at that point. There were times, as I said, that they fell for it, assuming that he had forgotten to add the qualifier and accepted it. And in the case of Joe Galeni, for example, another Hungarian agent trained along with Andy Dervitz at the camp, was a victim of that when a previous agent who was sent in to Hungary broke and contacted the British that he had arrived safely and was in a safe house, and to send in the rest of the team. And of course, Joe was dropped in behind enemy lines and almost immediately picked up by the Gestapo, knowing that he was coming in that night, that evening, and parachuted into a farmer's field, for example. So there were times when it worked and times when it didn't work. A good friend of mine, Eric Kerwayne, nom de guerre Bill Simpson, was the chief recruitment officer for Camp X. He recruited all the agents, and he told his boss at the time that, why don't we tape record the agent's fist? And that way, when he sent the signal back to Britain, we could immediately compare it and just say, we'll be right back to you, and compare it to the tape recording of his fist. And that would tell them whether or not the agent was the true agent or not. And it was a really great idea, but they didn't take him up on it. The British didn't take him up on it. And he maintained, you know, after the war, that had they done that, they probably would have saved a lot of lives and not dropped a lot of agents into occupied, captured areas and these various prisons that they were sent to.
Just to add to the Funkspiel, that's some crazy stuff. I wanted to add the story that I mentioned to you the other day. I found this small little book on Canadian spies, and it talks about Frank Pickersgill.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if he's had any connections to Camp X. I'm not sure. Haven't found that yet, but okay. But they talk about how he was captured by the Gestapo. I mean, it's an interesting story on the side of him. He caused a lot of chaos on the inside, a few escape attempts, and I mean, I think he killed a few soldiers on the inside. Unfortunately, he was eventually executed, but they pulled this Funkspiel for about 10 months or so, and they got about 15 large drop packages of arms and ammunitions, supplies, about $40,000 in French francs, and then, like you mentioned, soldiers, an unknown number of British and Canadian agents ended up in German hands. So it's just amazing that it lasted that long, and they were able to milk so much resources and even people out of that. So I mean, it would have been nice if they went with, I mean, the Camp X obviously has a lot of talented people and a lot of good ideas coming out of it. So it would have been nice if they used that. Maybe it would have spread to other areas, other units, and you know, maybe his fate would have turned out a little differently.
Yeah, Pickersgill was a Canadian agent from Guelph. He actually was trained in Britain. He was living in France before the war and fled to Britain, where he was picked up by the SOE because of his knowledge of Paris and the fact that he lived there for so long and being Canadian. A funny side story of that, there's nothing funny about it, but obviously, but for me, was that his brother I have my very first driver's license, and his brother signed my driver's license. He was the
Oh,
minister. He was Minister of Transportation for Ontario at the time. So
that's so cool.
years and years later, I thought that name is familiar, and I looked up my original license and found his name on there. Jack Pickersgill, his name was. And the other guy that was with him was a guy named McAllister. And
Sure.
unfortunately, the two of them were executed by the Gestapo. Pickersgill has he was a graduate of the University of Toronto, and there is a statue of him in front of one of the buildings at the University of Toronto. In fact, I was asked by someone recently if I would write up some words about him, of his background and some of the things that he did behind enemy lines,
Oh,
which they would like to add to that statue as a plaque, commemorative
wow.
plaque. Yeah.
Good for you. That's so amazing. I mean, this is stuff that a lot of the stuff we're talking about is the interrogation, the crazy Gestapo captures, the cyanide teeth, and all that kind of stuff. It's a big thing for Hollywood movies, right? It's a big thing that we see all over the place. So it's just amazing when you hear about all this stuff in real life, and you take a step outside the history books, like we spoke about last episode. You don't really hear anything about Camp X for the most part in history books, and it's a shame. There's so much interesting stuff, and that's a big reason I think why Canada doesn't get their fair due sometimes, because a lot of it just isn't mentioned and brought up.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that to you last time, that a lot of these Canadians who went over were presumed to be British,
Yeah,
or were registered as being British and not Canadian. So,
sure.
and that's another reason why they didn't get, their proper what they should have received in terms of recognition from, from the Canadian government, from the British government for that matter, and the French government. I mean, a number of these guys have the Croix de Guerre avec Palm from the French government for their services during World War II. And of course, in working with the resistance. So yeah, they were very, very successful.
Yeah, that trend of of just underestimating and just not giving Canada their fair credit, that it seems to have started early, and I still feel it today, and it's become a bit of a joke in pop culture too. You hear Canadians getting mocked and stuff in American television and Hollywood movies and stuff, and they just kind of play it off, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah, very true. Yeah, they played a huge role. And I mentioned before about the French Canadians and their involvement before D-Day, and their
sure.
involvement in training the resistance fighters, and the whole thing was very successful. It kept the Germans busy and the Gestapo busy trying to round up all these agents and resistance fighters. I'm
Yeah, you're
sure, I'm sure Hitler just thought that they were just going to lay down their arms and be good citizens and just follow like sheep. But that, of course, didn't happen, and didn't happen in really any of the countries. And it really would have been vicious had they actually invaded and occupied Great Britain.
right. Yeah. Like you said, some of those surrounding countries, the resistance fighters, they stuck together. They're very strong, and yeah, they stuck by their code, and they stuck by their people, and yeah, it was huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing you see in movies and TV a lot too. The unstoppable resistance fighter.
Unfortunately, some of these resistance fighters, they met a horrible fate in the fact that after the war, when people came out of their homes, they were accusing their neighbors of being collaborators with the Germans. And unfortunately, a number of these resistance fighters who were actually heroes ended up being basically stoned to death in the streets, because they were accused of being collaborators with the
Really,
German. Yeah,
that's so weird. Like, they're the ones getting accused. I mean, if you were to, before you told
yeah,
me that, when you presented that idea, I would have thought, okay, the resistance fighters got angry with the people that weren't willing to fight, and they accuse them. But you're telling me that the people that, sacrificed their lives and, made such a difference, they're the ones getting accused.
Yeah, it was very sad what happened. There's a fellow named Azarian. He was one of those individuals. That's what happened to him. And he was actually a very qualified agent and contributed greatly. And his brother still has a bounty out for the individuals who were responsible for stoning his brother to death. And it's a bounty of, I think it's £50,000 or something like that. And it's been out there ever since the Second World War, and it's still there today if anybody comes forward.
Really? So he was a resistance fighter that was stoned to
He was
death?
an agent.
He was an agent.
Oh. SOE agent. Yeah, SOE agent.
That's terrible. Unbelievable.
Yeah, there's a lot of those stories.
How is the Camp X museum coming along at Casa Loma? That's where you're opening it up, right? At part of Casa Loma?
Yeah, it's coming along great. The opening is going to be December, and I'm going to be down there the last week of November, putting the artifacts into all the display cabinets. They're being delivered. The brand new display cabinets are being delivered on, I think it's tomorrow they're being delivered. And so then we'll be putting it together fairly quickly. Yeah, so it's going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to taking pictures of the finished museum and getting that out there so that people will know about it and they can go see the various artifacts.
Cool. That's so great. Yeah, if you need a hand, like I said, just let me know. But I'm super excited to come. I'll definitely have to keep an ear open for the opening there. Are you doing like a special event or anything, or is it just come on down, we're open, we're ready to rock?
It's going to be a closed event on the evening of December the 9th, and then open the next day. But the reason for that is they want to have a thank you get together for all of those who were involved in contributing in some way and getting it together, and fundraisers. We had to put a fundraising package together to raise the money for the display cabinets.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was all done, and so it's more of an evening to thank the donors.
Oh, wonderful.
And then as I said, the next morning it'll be open to the public as a brand new exhibit.
Okay,
and then
so that's
we're going
the 10th.
to be
that's the 10th.
That'll be the 10th. Yeah,
okay.
Morning of the 10th. It's open to the public, right? And then the next thing that we're going to be doing after that is we're modifying the Station M collection. Currently, it is World War II agents' gadgets that were actually used by agents behind enemy lines that were manufactured in the basement of Casa Loma. And what we're going to be doing is adding those similar gadgets that are used today. So we've got a number of artifacts of gadgets that are used today for spying purposes and that type of thing. And we'll be putting those on display alongside the World War II gadgets. So that's the next thing we're working on.
Cool. That's exciting.
Yeah. So
that's exciting. We'll check that out for sure. Can you, we mentioned her before we started up. I'm kind of interested now in Madeline. Can we talk about her a little bit before we wrap it up? She was Canadian, right? Is that right?
No.
Oh, no? Okay.
No, she was British.
British, okay.
I'm not an expert on her, but she's a very famous one because she's been written about many times, and she's been portrayed in many movies as well. But there is a lot of information out there on her that you can actually read. I do have her PF, her personal file.
Oh.
Yeah, so I do have that, and it tells the whole story. But it too is a very sad story. The guy who was in charge of France was a man named Buckmaster, and a number of handlers told Buckmaster that she wasn't ready, and don't send her in behind enemy line. But he was desperate for bodies and sent her in, and she was quickly picked up, and she too was brutally tortured for information, and eventually murdered at the hands of the Gestapo, but at a very young age, of course. But it was a sad story because, it's one of these things where they warned him, don't send her in, she's not ready. And they had a lot of psychologists who would deal with these individuals to try to determine whether or not they were psychologically ready for that kind of exposure, And it's interesting to read some of the PFs because many cases where some guy qualified as an agent and was a good agent in the training, but then psychologically wasn't ready for it.
Yeah.
So, but again, as I said, they needed bodies. I mean, every time somebody was picked up, that was one guy out of commission. And they had to keep sending more and more. So sometimes they were able to send in very qualified agents, and sometimes some people fold quickly and others never fold.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah. There is a group that I belong to. It's called the Soe Society, and I've been a member for 25 years now. I'm also a member of the OSS Society. And a lot of information is shared daily back and forth. I probably get 20 emails a day from historians in England. And it will be stories just like the one that I told you. And then they get into a back and forth on it in terms of what's the accurate story. Are the files accurate, or, does somebody have interviews with an individual that they felt differently about the official history that was written about them? So
is this it right here?
I can't see that very well.
It's
that's
OSS
the OSS. Yeah, that's the
.org?
OSS Society. Yeah,
Okay.
that's all American. So they're all American agents. The SOE Society, it's a forum, okay, of emails that go back and forth.
Okay, so there's no website for that one.
There is. I don't use it very often, but there is a website.
Like if you wanted to sign up, do they allow members, or?
They do allow members. You have to request to be a member, and usually they would want to know what your intent is. So if you were writing a book, that's fine. Or if you're writing a book on a specific subject, that too is good. And you're doing research on it. So yes, you can sign up, but you have to go through the process of requesting that. But another a great site to visit is the Bletchley and the Bletchley Manor. They've got a website on that, and they teach you all about codes and whatnot. And I teach students in school. I haven't done it for a while, but I've done it for many years in a coding system that I developed. And funny thing is, one of my students posted on the Bletchley Park site a coded message, and it's 5 characters sets, and that's the way that the message runs, and it's coded. So I saw it, and I knew right off the bat that it was my code. So I deciphered it, and I sent a message back to that person, and it turned out it was one of my students, and who had posted this. And then I got an email from the people who operate Bletchley Park, and they said to me, "Your odds of winning are 14 million to 1." Well, if you code this properly, your odds of breaking it are 14 million to 1. And it really takes a computer program to. Could you please tell us what coding system you're using? We put it through Colossus, and Colossus couldn't break it. Which was quite amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, because it's just like 649 to go through the 14 million different combinations that it could be to actually break the code. So
wow.
Yeah, so that was really interesting, because I had got back to them and I said, well, actually it's a coding system that I developed and that I teach in schools. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's amazing. That's interesting stuff. Yeah, well, maybe that's something that we can put together one day, doing some codebreaker related stuff.
There's a lot of good books on it. I've got most of them. One's called Hut 6, and of course it's dealing with Alan Turing. In fact, on that site, I was just looking at it yesterday. They opened up a new exhibit in Hut 6, and it's Alan Turing's office, and they've recreated his office exactly the way it was, with the actual furniture and everything else. So it's really an amazing museum, Bletchley Park.
That's cool. Wow. Interesting. That's great. Yeah, there's so much for those of you listening in Canada. There's so much interesting stuff out there. You just gotta go find it. Whether you look for books like Lynn's, or whether you go to museums or whatnot, there's so much out there. And yeah, do not take the country for granted, because there's, aside from how beautiful it is and how much there is to see outside, there's so much history, and there's so much that past Canadians have done. And I think it's definitely worth worth remembering that. So, but again, Lynn, thank you so much for coming in. It's always a pleasure having you. I love the stuff that you talk about, man. It's very interesting. I'll definitely be in touch for you coming back. But is there anything that you want to share with my listeners? Websites, social media, anything like that? I know we talked about the museum, which is very exciting. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, on my website, camp-x.com, I was meant to mention this to you as well, is that there is a thing, there's a page on it that says the top 100 questions asked by the Gestapo at interrogations.
Okay.
You might find that interesting.
Oh, right here. 100 questions captured agents were asked?
Right. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah, very, very interesting, because then for kids who are doing projects and whatnot, that's the kind of thing that they like to know about. What kind of information were they trying to get out of them? And they were, as I said, they were very skilled at it. So there's a lot of additional information on my website about the entire subject.
Great. Yeah, I've been looking at it since we spoke last time, and absolutely, there's a lot of cool stuff. So I'll include that as kind of a bit of Remembrance Day homework for people, for look through the 100 different questions that captured Canadian soldiers and other captured soldiers were asked by the Gestapo and Nazi interrogators. That's wild stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So again, that's camp-x.com, and there's so many different resources there. So I definitely recommend you taking the time to check that out. And again, if you want to start on some of his books, I definitely recommend starting off with Inside Camp X. I loved it. It was wonderful, and it definitely set me down a great path of Canadian history and some awesome stuff that, yeah, I'm still going down that path. So
yeah,
again,
the book is $20, and we mail them out from our condo. So
beautiful.
They go out the next day.
Cool. Yeah, you got the special signed edition, right?
Yes, it is. And yeah, they're all numbered and autographed, right?
Beautiful. Right on. Yeah, I have myself a copy as well. And I actually, William Ramsey, who I've had on the show a couple times, I was talking to him about how I found your book, and I was talking to him about our episode, and he was super interested. So I told him to check out the episode, and then I sent him a copy of Inside Camp X. So he should be getting that any day now.
Excellent.
Yeah. So yeah, again, everyone have a wonderful Remembrance Day, and Lynn, happy Remembrance Day to you as well. And yeah, be well, and I'll definitely be talking to you soon, my friend.
I'll be down at Camp X at 11 o'clock on Thursday.
Okay, wonderful. I mean, hey, if I can get myself a ride, maybe I'll stop on by. But if not, I'll talk to you soon. Okay. Is there a ceremony going on there?
There is. Two in company is a Canadian intelligence organization who are active and were until just recently active in Afghanistan. They put on a service there every year, so they'll be there this year as always.
Wonderful. Enjoy. Okay. Well, have yourself a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon, my friend.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.